fashionable. Carolyn used to have face masks that matched her outfit. Style.
Where's your family's business?
Very good.
All right, should we go ahead and get started?
Yes.
All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Are we recording?
Yes.
Just noting that Erica is not feeling well today, didn't want to spread her germs around, but is participating online.
Awesome.
Rasan let me know that he will be a little late. Rashad unfortunately had another meeting come up and has a conflict. But I think we're still expecting Tony and Yeshin. So good evening to everybody. This is our third proposal review session, and just really appreciate everybody being here, working through these proposals. I think we're making really good progress. We've had some really interesting conversation, really good conversations that have certainly for me illuminated a lot of important issues and perspectives. Today we have a couple more business tax proposals. We have a couple more business tax proposals, B2 and M6, and then it's all property tax. What you'll see today is most of our property tax proposals, not all of them. We ended up being not quite ready to share with you some of the, particularly around property tax relief proposals, building on some of the presentations we had earlier this year. We will get to those in October, but I had more work to do to get full input from the ORA team at OCFO. So we will get to those in October. A few reminders. Richard and I will be walking through the proposals, providing a very brief overview of each proposal and rattling off the pros and cons that we've put together. These are not we're presenting them, but they're not our proposals. That you feel free to critique them without fear that we'll take anything personally. We've really tried to reflect as best we can what we thought were the major proposals and themes that we were hearing from experts and from stakeholder meetings and public sessions. We've done our best to distill the proposals into concrete policy options, one or two options, but again, there's a lot of ways these could go. So you should feel free to push a different approach or ask why we didn't consider yet a different option. At this point, we really want to know, ideally, where you are on each proposal. But it's also totally okay if you still have more questions than answers. That's very understandable. We're in the process of compiling a list of your questions from the last few meetings. We're still working on researching the answers, and we'll start to get those back to you as well. So questions are great, but also we'd love to hear what you think about some of these ideas. Just a peek into the future. Next week, we're going to take a break from proposal review, and we'll do an expert briefing focusing on economic development, specifically in fast-growing cities. So we have speakers who are experts on what's going on in Tennessee and Texas and places like that, as well as national experts on tax competitiveness. Then back on October 10th, we'll resume proposal review. I think we have 3 sessions right now scheduled for October, although one of them we may need to move around. That's in a nutshell where we are today. As I said, we'll be presenting. I think we're going to try again to take a break at around the 1 hour mark or so. Depending on although if we're making really good progress, we might decide to keep moving through that. That's all I have. Tony, anything you want to add? Questions, comments? All right, let's dive straight in. We are starting today with B2, reform or repeal the unincorporated business tax, franchise tax. We talked a fair amount about the unincorporated business franchise tax last week. As you recall, the UB tax is a tax that is paid by some, not all, unincorporated businesses in the district. It's a tax on net income, in other words, profits, and it's taxed at the same rate as the corporate income tax, 8.25%. What's interesting about the UB tax is that income subject to the UB tax is exempt for DC residents from the graduated rate income tax. So you pay on the income from your UB business, you pay at the 8.25% rate, you don't pay at the district's regular graduated rate. So, some DC residents pay UB taxes and have incomes in a lower tax bracket, and so they're paying more taxes under the UB than they would under the graduated rate approach. Others have higher incomes, and so under the UB tax, they're paying less than they would under the district's graduated rate income tax. Like I said, not all businesses pay the UB tax. You're exempt if most of your sales are for basically the personal services you're providing. And also if you're engaged in a trade, business, or professional organization that by law and customer ethics cannot be incorporated. That's the phrase from the court ruling. And the law firms is a great example of who's not paying an unincorporated business, in which case DC residents with law firm income are just paying tax on that income through the regular individual income tax. A lot of the UB tax is paid by non-residents. About 55% of UB tax is actually paid by businesses that are owned by non-residents. A lot of that's, not all of it, but a substantial minority of that is real estate trusts. Other states don't have this tax. What they have instead is the ability to levy their individual income taxes on non-residents. We can't do that, so this is sort of the alternative to that. So this document puts forward a couple of options for what to do with it. One is to just repeal it entirely. The tax brings in about $170 million a year. So you would think, full repeal costs about $170 million, and that's what it says in here. But in fact, it's a little more complicated than that, because DC residents would actually not benefit a repeal, because that income would then be subject to the individual income tax. So they currently pay UB tax. That tax that income, if it wasn't a UB tax, would be subject to DC income. So the net revenue loss is more like about $84 million. And that's entirely from the loss of taxes paid by non-residents. The other option is to keep the tax, but allow DC residents to claim a dollar-for-dollar credit for it. This wouldn't affect non-residents; they keep paying the same amount, but it would have the effect of basically meaning that DC residents are paying tax on this income under the graduated rate income tax that applies to all of their income. The arguments for the change, arguably getting rid of it could incentivize entrepreneurship. You've got lower marginal tax rates, particularly on the first few dollars of income from the UB business. You'd have more consistency across different types of income, and you'd have greater progressivity because you'd be matching the UB tax system, which dates back to a time when the district generally had a pretty flat personal income tax rate. You'd be saying, well, we're going to tax UB revenue the same as we're taxing other income on the progressive income scale. If we fully repeal it, mostly we're benefiting non-residents. If you do go to either the credit or the repeal approach, you're going to be raising taxes on some high-income business owners. And there's interactions with the federal tax system at all, which gets into the question of the SALT cap workaround that we talked about last week. If we replace it with a credit, that's a very good fit for if we then create a SALT cap workaround. So it's a pretty in some ways it's a complicated proposal based on the complicated way that the UB tax interacts with the personal income tax system, but I hope I've laid it out somewhat clearly. Questions, comments, thoughts? Jim?
What's the rationale for the unincorporated business tax?
So it was created essentially because DC doesn't have the ability to tax commuter income. So initially it applied to all unincorporated, as it applies to all unincorporated businesses in the district. Then came along the court ruling that said, well, we can't tax certain kinds of unincorporated businesses like law firms, but it continues to apply to other kinds of unincorporated businesses. So that's basically the rationale, is to act as the equivalent of essentially a non-resident income tax.
How many people pay what? How many people file for this every year?
It's about it's about 6,000 DC residents have UB income. There's actually about 20-something, 22,000 UB returns that are filed, so that's both businesses owned by residents and non-residents. Those don't exactly match up to each other because one person could own or be a participant in multiple UB entities, so we don't know exactly how many.
And about 1,600 are earning under $60,000.
Yeah, about
They have that
1,600.
perverse consequence then.
Right, so they have that perverse consequence. And at the other end of the scale, about 1,200 DC residents have taxable income over $500,000. So they're in a significant, if they were to start paying into the personal income tax rate, they'd be in a higher bracket. And so the net effect is that you've got some DC residents who would pay a little more in tax, some would pay a little less, and nets out to about $13 million in overall revenue increase, which we could then apply to some other kind of business tax decrease, or we could reduce the rate.
It's hard for me to take this, and I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but to take this sort of out of context, so to speak, and to look at this, I am a payer of this, tax. But to look at it without the broader context of all sort of business tax, it's a little hard for me, and I don't know if you guys have looked at that. It's hard to say this is good or this is bad. I feel like, and maybe we've already done that, it's sliced and diced, like here are all the taxes paid by a business, and here is the competitiveness of that total, versus looking at a singular tax and saying, this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. It's hard because in other cities, real estate people pay taxes everywhere, right? But in other cities, you have what would look like this commuter tax. And so that, to me, is not that unusual, but when you look at it all stacked up together, I think that's where we should focus as a group. And I'm sorry if I missed that presentation.
And I'm sorry, Nick, can you tell me how many taxpayers would be affected with the increased rate? How many of the filings?
About 1,200 residents have right now have about 1,200 DC residents who are paying UB tax have total taxable income over 500,000. So they would be paying more.
Why does, I'm sorry, help me understand, why does it apply only to over 500,000?
Sorry, I can't hear you. There's a fan.
Why does it only apply to those who make over 500,000? I mean, if the idea is that we would convert people from this unincorporated business franchise tax of 8.25, they would then pay whatever their normal, if this were just traditional income. What's the $500,000 trigger?
So the $500, that's where the higher DC personal income tax rates kick in at this point. And I'm going to blank on what they are.
Well, that's 10.25 and 10.75.
Yeah,
Because they would get a credit up to that amount?
Because they would get a full, instead of taking your UB income, right now, your whole UB income is taxed at 8.25%. And the creditor approach would say, no, you're going to get a credit for the UB tax you pay, but it's a dollar for dollar
I
credit.
see. So their tax increase would be above that amount. And that's provided we stay at whatever these rates are, whatever these high-end rates are. That's right. What I'm very focused on in this matter is what we're doing to actually address, racial equity. And, I'm not satisfied with the explanations that are in this document, that if you burden one race, it necessarily means that you have benefited another. At the end of the day, you have just burdened one race without any commensurate improvement. To me, equity is how you bring close parity, not how you gore your neighbor's ox, and maybe you do or maybe you don't add anything. I was just sharing with Caroline, I promised her that I just looked at the SBA numbers for the percentage of businesses that are owned by Black residents of the city. It's 13.5% of our businesses are owned by Black residents. who constitute 45% of the population. I want to see what we're doing. To me, a racial equity proposal is going to be one that invests there. It isn't simply goring the neighbor's ox. All right, I just want to be very clear, and I really find that language, not, not unifying. Let me put it that way. So I'm going to keep an open mind to this.
You're saying the language where you're distinguishing non-DC residents from DC residents?
No, I mean, I think there's just a heavy component of the justifications of racial equity based on historic groups that may own businesses or may not. And the notion is that if you tax the group that owns businesses without doing anything for any of the other races, that means equity.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And what to me that means is I gore my neighbor's ox without doing anything about a 13.5% ownership, which is the real issue. So I would look at, how do we have tax credits to invest in historically underserved communities and underserved businesses, looking to use the carrot. That's all. That's my focus. Everyone else has their own, but that's mine.
Pretty sure this proposal says that businesses under $60,000, which are disproportionately Black and Brown owned businesses, would be the ones that would benefit the most. It seems like that would be potentially a good thing for Black and Brown entrepreneurs who want to start a business, that they would see that they actually could do that without owing taxes. I think that's a standing argument in this room. So I don't think that this is a one-sided proposal that raises taxes on one side and doesn't do anything about small Black and Brown owned businesses on the other side. I'm curious how this would relate to the business activity tax if we were to, I'm particularly interested in the credit proposal here, option B. So I'm wondering, did you guys think at all about how that would line up with a business activity tax?
Yeah, you could do a couple of things. One possibility is you could just use the revenue for the business activity tax to effectively replace this. And you could say, non-resident owned businesses are going to pay the business activity tax. Maybe we no longer have to pay this tax. The other approach, there's not a particular reason why you couldn't do the credit approach here and also do a business activity tax that also provides you a credit against the current UB tax, so that essentially nobody is paying more under people who already have substantial UB tax liability would not be paying more. We haven't. Sort of to Jody's point, it's true. We are presenting these just in separate chunks to be sort of talked through separately. Ultimately, they need to be thought about as a coherent picture. And one of the things we talked about last week, which I think is a really good idea, is providing you all with some, when we sort of start to get our sense around what is the package or what is the possible parameters of the package, what would that look like altogether for different kinds of businesses?
May I just follow? I appreciate, Erica, your point that lower taxes will spur economic activity. I appreciate that. My point is, though, that lower taxes alone without investment in communities that have historically lacked access to capital, simply lowering taxes may not be the only solution. That's all. Thank you.
I'm all for raising revenue to invest in low-income Black and Brown communities. So we agree there, David.
I agree with what you and Jody basically said, that this has some merits, it's got some unintended consequences that are bothersome. But Jody, to your point, I think the way I'm thinking of this stuff is, it's got some merits. We won't know what they're really like until we know what other types of relief we can do to compensate for the unintended consequences. So we won't know till the end how much we like this or not. But I think it does, address the fairness issue about who doesn't pay at all. It does get to entrepreneur thing, and a couple of proposals, it does simplify things. If you were to abolish it, it's one less tax to pay when they file. But it's got some unintended consequences of the people you said, over 500K, whom I wouldn't want to, hit with another tax unless we can provide relief in something else that's coming down the pike or we've talked about already. So,
But to get to if I could.
Yes, sir.
So to get to the, collateral effects of this particular tax, at Jody's point, we talked about cataloging all the different proposals along certain lines, so cataloging them along competitiveness, fairness, efficiency of administration. So you guys are working on that, right, to Jody's point? Okay.
I think that's important.
So you can see the interrelationships here.
I think that would be really
Yeah.
helpful and important to see as we.
Let me just take David's point a little bit here. If there's 13,000, at least what I know, I suspect, and what I've known, that the revenue is already low, so they're paying fewer taxes based upon the revenue. I suppose the question is, how do you use the tax code to spur, if it's credits that someone will get based upon existing lower revenues? Do you use that as a tool, as opposed to maybe lowering the whole tax burden? I'm not too sure that lowering the tax burden in of itself would be very much.
So I'll give you I should have mentioned this earlier, one of the speakers we had at one of the stakeholder meetings was a owner of a small childcare center, right? So has a few employees, has pretty low income though. So they don't, because it's not their own personal services, they're participating in this tax, but they're paying at the 8.25% rate. And so from that person's perspective, the tax was a little bit of a barrier to sustaining the business, to continuing the business, to expanding the business. But I think your point is it's not really a spark to creating a new business. All right. All right, any final thoughts about this one?
So where we leaning, repeal or reform?
Yeah, we haven't really talked, I don't know, what do you think?
I would be in favor of looking at reform, but taking into consideration some of the comments that were made.
Well, and to Mayor Williams' part, I think the notion of the total burden we're imposing, I mean, there was just this recent report that says we lost, and I'll defer to the CFO, 30,000 residents, but we have lost during post-pandemic, 31,000 residents whose incomes were between 100 and 200,000, resulting in $3 billion of lost revenue, so several $100 million walks out the door. That's a whole lot of complications that went into it, residency, taxes, safety, and all that stuff. But anything that might facilitate more of that, I'd want to look at very carefully.
Yeah, I think the recent studies are pretty clear, but we've lost $100 billion, right, in IRS taxes in the Northeast corridor. I mean 60 billion from Washington, Boston, New York corridor. We picked up 100 billion down in the Southeast in 6 states. It's not a dollar for dollar move, but there's clear data that shows that people are being, I know we sat with somebody who said they weren't being incentivized in 2012, but I think there's clear data.
I mean, that data, he said they looked at the update in 2020 and 2021. It's in his presentation, and that things hadn't actually changed. So it's not, I know we keep saying in this room that it's old data that we were presented by Christo Young, but that's not actually the case. He had some pre-prepared charts, but he did take the time to tell us that he looked at the newer data and the patterns hadn't changed, that taxes were not driving migration.
Well, this is IRS data that the city analyzed that was unique to the district. That said,
Yes, over the pandemic years, yeah. I think we already knew that we lost a lot of population. We also have seen census data showing that some of that population is coming back.
We are definitely coming back to this point, so we can continue this discussion
sure.
down the road, because we are coming back to this point. I have my theory that you're buying a shopping basket and what do I want to pay for this bundle of goods? which includes good libraries, restaurants, I'm safe, I have good schools, and this and that. Now, if you live in DC and you're in Northwest, you got good schools, everything's good, you're gonna be more likely to stay than if you're a young family. Things aren't as good, you're gonna pay for the schools and the taxes are high. You're asking people, in my opinion, that's not a good combination. So I think a lot of the states where you looked at the data, like New Jersey, all the people in New Jersey who are living in communities are high income, they have good schools, they're the people that freaked out about SALT. They're gonna be less likely to leave because their bundle of goods is better. But if you're a city struggling to get going, and you're not offering this full package, you got a problem. That's my view. See, to me, it's not just taxes, but it is influenced by taxes. But we can go back to this
Yeah.
discussion.
And this is the main topic for next Tuesday evening's presentation. And somewhat related, next proposal is M6, miscellaneous 6, change administrative practices per the recommendations from the Council on State Taxation. COST is an industry group that represents the nation's largest private sector employers, and in one of our stakeholder meetings, they came with a report and said we gave the district a D- grade for its tax appeals processes and administrative practices. They were particularly focused on corporate income taxes, but some of the comments apply also to personal income taxes. They highlighted 3 particular policies and practices that they saw as problematic. So one is the over-under rate of interest that people pay if they either overpay their taxes or if they underpay their taxes. So under current law, if I overpay to DC and it takes a while to get that money back, the district owes me up to 6%. It fluctuates a little bit with what the residing interest rates are. If I underpay and later have to make that up, in addition to any penalties, I have to pay 10% interest. COST recommends that those be equal rates. The second thing that they were recommending is that we look at the corporate tax filing deadlines. Right now, DC has the same corporate tax filing deadlines as the IRS. COST wants a little extra time, and also automatic extensions. And the third thing is that according to the COST study, district provides a lot less time for taxpayers to appeal an income tax assessment than other jurisdictions do. And I've had a number of conversations with OTR about this, and as I understand it, their view is that, well, actually, we give taxpayers a lot more time than perhaps the COST methodology reflects, because COST isn't taking into account this or that. So there may be an opportunity to clarify for purposes of advertising to the world that we are a taxpayer-friendly jurisdiction. And so the one of these that costs revenue is the changing the interest rates. And that's because both, say again?
Do you know how much revenues come from the underpaid and how much we pay?
It's in the million. The difference between paying, their estimate is that if you equalize it, it would cost the district a total of $10 million from a combination of increasing the underpayment rate and reducing the underpayment rate and increasing the overpayment rate in line with Virginia. So it's about $10 million a year. And that's both just changing the amount of interest that's being paid or that is being paid in one direction or another. And that also reflects some assumptions about behavioral changes. So the assumption is that if you're having to pay more interest, you're gonna change you may change your behavior, and that kind of goes.
Do we know how much we get now for penalties, income tax?
Penalties somewhere. Yeah, we collected 11.6 million on tax underpayments outside of the property tax, and we paid about 1.7 million in interest on refunds.
And there are penalties on top of that.
And then there's penalties on top of that. So this is not about the penalties, this is just about the interest.
Could we ask the CFO his thoughts on these? I don't know this well enough to know.
Right.
Just in terms of Cindy's experience, what do you think?
Yeah, the date change is nonsensical. I mean, the vast majority of states, from my experience, are on target with what the federal government does. I've seen various combinations of over-under rates from parity to heavily weighted toward the jurisdiction, never the other way around. On the margin, I'm not sure if a big difference there really makes a difference in compliance responsibility. That's an observation, not an analytical assessment. So, we would administer what the council passes, and if parity is a way to think about it, I'd ask that the rate float with some key rate rather than we pick 5%, 10%, or everything's 5%. That doesn't make sense. There's too much volatility in the market. And on the margin, people do play either an overpayment, I know that sounds crazy, a little bit of overpayment if they can get a lot more money from us and getting an appeal and getting their money back. I've seen that happen. So my request is that if we do something that we set it, we bench it to something and then add a couple percent. So whatever rate you would want to consider, I think that's essential. So that
Like the overnight plus
How
whatever.
do you calculate that? You really.
we'd probably set it like once a year or once a quarter,
Yeah.
something like that. We wouldn't want it to float overnight. But there's a variety of indexes to use.
Yeah.
We can look at the bond market as a good place. That's where I would look.
That's what Virginia does, and that's what the IRS does. They
Yeah.
floating rates, and they adjust them every year.
Right.
And so some states actually piggyback on the IRS rate. That's actually what Virginia does, except it just piggybacks on one of the IRS rates and then makes it equal across over and under for all types of
Do
taxpayers.
you know what that is, Nick, today,
It's,
or thereabouts?
right now it's around 9%.
I didn't expect him to know, like, he knows this stuff, but it'd be nice to know if we're talking about 50% or 5 or 6.
No, it's around, yeah, right now it's 9%.
It seems cold though to charge people more.
So I've helped implement that kind of scheme, and it was just a way to get a little bit more money on the margin in the tax negotiation. Could you imagine that, Mayor? That could happen. So in a different jurisdiction. I don't know if there's any analytics that prove there's a benefit to tax administration to have different rates. I've not heard of such an assessment. So that's, unless you guys agree.
I mean, OTR's view is that it helps, there would be behavioral change. It's hard to know. Hey, or sign. Thoughts on these? Are these priorities? David's nodding his head.
I think that the date change shouldn't be a financial lift, but there's some way to keep it in play without it being a big cost or administrative burden. I think it's worth just keeping around, especially in parity with the feds. That seems to make it easier for taxpayers, so they'll know. We might even make money on it, actually, if we increase. You never know.
Did you put a note on the bill saying we're charging excessive interest to pay for the mayor and council salaries?
No, sir.
We can ask people to contribute $1 of their tax return every
Yeah,
year.
this is going to the mayor's party rate.
Other thoughts? All right, those are our business tax topics for today, and now we're going to move on to the property tax. Richard's going to kick us off.
Okay, so we are going to start with P1, which is relatively straightforward, lowering the commercial property tax rates. The district levies high taxes on commercial property. We have visual aid to help us today. This shows DC and some Northern Virginia jurisdiction. I don't know which one it is, and it doesn't matter because it's higher than all of them. And it's higher than all of them in Maryland too. The DC commercial property tax is also, say, a little inefficient. It's not marginal rates. They're literally buckets. That is, if your commercial property is valued at less than $5 million, you pay $165 per 100. If your property is valued between $5 million and 10, you pay $177 per 100. Not on the amount that it exceeds $5 million, but on the entire thing. So you go $1 over, you go into a new bucket, you pay higher taxes. And there's a third rate, $189 per 100. for properties valued above 10 million. So the proposal, simple, lower it. We are just throwing out lower it 10 cents per $100 of assessed value. I'm going to jump ahead to the end where we show you the revenue estimate, which is basically, that would be 94 million for 10 cents. You can do some really challenging math there to learn that about 1 cent is going to be about 9.4. And so no matter how far you want to cut it, you can kind of do the math. Put a pin in that. The other proposal is to eliminate the cliffs, and that is just to make this a little simpler system so that you're not penalized for going $1 over into the next thing. Back to the bigger proposal on lowering the rate. This is a competitiveness issue. The idea being that the district's rate is pushing people out, and it's not letting us pull people into the district to establish businesses, to hire people, and create economic activity. The argument against it, it's really revenue. Again, this is a really expensive change. I will let you know that in 2013, we talked about lowering the commercial property tax rate a lot, all the time. We really wanted to do it. It just cost too much. For example, during that commission, we decided we would rather lower the business franchise tax than the commercial property tax rate, and in part because the commercial property tax is just so different that we could get our business franchise down to Maryland, but we're never going to find the money to do it. And so I'll turn that over to you, which is that I think that just the way I think about this is that there's definitely always a push for this, but it's kind of how badly do you want it, how much are you willing to spend on this, or are you thinking of different taxes and providing relief and attracting residents to the city?
What is the cost of making it marginal?
We don't have that yet.
In the city next year, you're not going to probably see a new print go up in 2025. And property owners, I think it's a question of not only bringing businesses in, but it's people wanting to reinvest versus just exit. I think this is a huge issue that we have to think about as a city, but I think about it being paired with property values. They're going to get crushed over the next, so I'm balancing these two things, and of course, decreasing property taxes makes sense to me, but I'm thinking about what's about to happen in valuations, and I don't think we realize that as a city yet. I'm sure your models are all over this, and so I am somebody who wants to lean in 100% to competitiveness issues. I think that's a major
I mean, this is anecdotal, but I would just say I was just at a luncheon with Governor Youngkin, and he said everyone in this room will be Virginia residents or be doing business in Virginia, and that's his goal. So to the context of like competitiveness, they're lowering taxes, and so they're structuring their tax situation in such a way that it's so attractive for businesses to now do business in Virginia. And I just wanted to put that out there because he said it open. I wish I could record that. I wish I was there. I could have recorded it.
any one of their economic development people will tell you they will do whatever it takes to relocate you out of the city.
I really think we need a better definition of economic competitiveness than just tax rates. I mean, I think that we have to think about this in a more comprehensive way. And if we stay in the space of just thinking about tax rates, it just leads to a race to the bottom that we probably can't win. I mean, we could all go on a tax rate slashing spree, and there's still going to be a whole bunch of other questions about why and where people choose to set up a business. So I feel like this is a very narrow conversation. I'm also just curious, like I could imagine a reason for wanting to, I've heard you all talk about some commercial properties being in a bad place and needing some, maybe to see their taxes reduced, but this is a very blunt sort of across the board rate reduction that would go to businesses whether they really need to or not, whether they're planning on leaving or not. So I wonder if, I don't believe this is the right tool for working on DC's competitiveness.
Just so we're clear, these taxes aren't paid by the building owners, these are pass-throughs. And so when we're at $1.89 for $100 of assessed value in Northern Virginia, it's at $1.03, we really aren't going to get to $1.03, and it's not prudent for us to do it. But I think through the lens of concessions and down payments for long-term competitiveness, and these reductions can have triggers, so that if we don't have certain revenue projections, then we don't proceed. We can do this in a measured, responsible way. There's no question about it. I just think that it's at this point in time, it's a must. Our downtown buildings are turning themselves, our owners are turning them over to the banks one a day. But that coupled with the conversion from commercial to residential and what that would mean for our treasury is another thing. And God bless the fact that we have those conversions, because there will at least be some revenue coming out. I just think we should seriously consider it, and I'd be in favor of proceeding with this until we get to the final package and see what we can afford. And that's it. And the things that are really worrying me, just shut up guys, is it's not just that our downtown properties are worth 60 cents of what they were pre-COVID, and that they're being returned to the banks on a daily basis. It's that at the same time we're in this environment, our businesses are shrinking their footprints downtown in part to absorb these expenses. I think you could make the case that it costs about $6,000 more to employ someone in the district than it does in Virginia, unrelated to property tax. And these are things like wage theft laws, these are paid sick and safe, these are mandatory transit benefits, these are environmental credits, environmental charges, all of these things together, workers' comp, et cetera, combine to make it more expensive to hire here. So if we're going to have anyone left downtown, we've got to make some concession to this, seriously.
But those things you mentioned are also things that makes the district really attractive for people to live in. Like, people want to go to a place where they get paid sick leave no matter what their job is, or where they get some of those other benefits. I think that you can't just look at that as a cost. It's also got benefits.
But Eric, can I just say that?
Go ahead.
And then you'll bear with me there.
That's some other
you
people
can
talk.
work in the district and not pay taxes in the district and get paid leave from the taxpayer. My ex-husband, who had a business and contributed significantly to the tax base of the district, but worked in Maryland, got nothing.
But if I could just say another point on this, I was talking about the thinking of taxes as what you pay for a basket of goods in place A versus place B. Another way to think about this is when you set policies, whether they're regulation or taxes, you're sending a signal to people who are paying attention. And when you set policy, people are either paying a lot of attention, you get a lot of response, or they don't pay attention, you don't get any response. So the district is, I think, a city where there's a lot of responsiveness to policy input. So I would give you example A would be NOMA, where everybody remembers NOMA 30 years ago. There was nothing, there was no union market, there was no subway, there was nothing. And we basically did a tax incentive to build the metro station. There was a huge response in what you're seeing now. So there is responsive to these signals we send in tax, even if there weren't definitive empirical evidence that what we did could be proved, we sent a signal and huge response. Another example would be the wharf, where we were collecting $7 or $8 million in taxes. We sent a signal to the world, we're investing heavily in the wharf with 10 million or whatever it was, not that much, we're getting 90 now, right? So there's huge response to what we do. I think we should take that into account. So even if we didn't bring our property tax down to the level of Virginia, and I would agree with Dave, we're not gonna get there. But if we made a marked decrease in the commercial real property tax, I think it would be huge, there would be a huge reception in the capital markets real estate world to the benefit of all the things we want to pay for. That's my little cut on it. So.
I agree with what David said and the mayor as well. And since this is the industry that is our biggest worry right now in terms of fiscal solvency in the future, if there was any place where I would err on the side of helping them out, this is it. And I just noticed too, since we're not in a position of creating a hole for the city, this is why you would have a business activity tax to provide this kind of relief. So if we're going to have a business activity tax, that's money that can be poured back into targeted relief strategically for businesses like this.
I agree.
All right.
But can I just ask a follow-up question on that? Gregory, are you saying revenue from a business activity tax would buy down the commercial property tax rate? Or are you saying it would provide us with funds to do targeted relief to commercial properties that are underwater?
The former. So it would allow us the bandwidth to do what's proposed here.
What I'd be concerned about is whether the action that would be taken in order, whether that's in response to this pandemic or post-pandemic environment, and what would happen if we came out of that post-pandemic environment. Because, look, property owners will complain about the tax rate pre-pandemic. They complain about the tax rate being too high, but they paid it. Now, with buildings being 6% occupied, they don't want to pay it. And then although the valuation was low. My only point is let's be cautious about proceeding along this particular line. And look, and I may be speaking against my own interest in this regard, but the realism is that let's examine this. And I think to Tony's larger point about the basket of services that are provided, let's look at that whether we reduce real estate taxes.
But could we frame it with the triggers? Could we frame this issue around the triggers? If the revenue is thus so within a period of time, we do this and then just frame it with.
I think that's the way to consider it, if I'm honest, and that Gregory might be slightly different than what you've anticipated. But let's assume that revenue, as has been the case, grows significantly above inflation in the city. We've been lucky; that could change. But you could tether the tax reduction to revenue increases, and if the revenue increases didn't come, then well, we would stop the reductions. That we could do without necessarily reducing any existing programs. Look, I'm a proponent of holding the line on taxes, not for some flat earth society view of not wanting to pay. It's the only thing we have as citizens to force responsibility and accountability on the people who spend our money. That's it. It's not like government has recessions. The only thing that limits feeding that organism is restraint on revenue, which forces them to look behind themselves and ask, are we spending these dollars wisely? That's it.
Yeah, I agree with David. That's the larger, more fundamental question. I mean, look, we have a $19 billion budget. And the question is, do we spend that in the most judicious way? And if the revenue continue to just flow in, it's going to be spent. No questions asked about it. So maybe this is a way of raising that question about accountability and spending the citizens' money.
So the last commission did revenue cut, like tax cut triggers. And my recollection of all that is that it resulted in there being budget cuts when people didn't expect it, because revenue were growing, but so were the costs of like providing the services and programs and things that were on the table at the time. And so you had a situation of budget cuts while tax cuts were also happening at the same time. So you can have revenues go up and it's bigger on tax cuts. And
I go do some research, that's just not true. The budget continued to grow, and we had huge growth in the district following. And I'm not saying it's only because of the tax revision, but we saw huge growth in the district over the last, unless I missed something, over the past 10 years.
We're happy to
Yeah.
provide research,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
by next week, but we can demonstrate that issue
Yeah.
exactly the way you're describing.
Costs certainly go up. I mean, Erica has a good point. Costs go up, and we appreciate
Don't
that.
deny that.
But there are some things that are kind of not commensurate. And so since the last commission, in 2011, our population has grown a total of 4.8%. The number of district employees since the last commission has grown by 23.2%. Now, I'm not so great at math, but that seems like a 4+ time, almost a 5-time outpacing of growth of government versus growth of population. There needs to be some.
They clearly didn't starve the budget.
There needs, you know what I'm saying? Look, no one's trying to turn us, no one's trying to make us Texans. What we're trying to do is to be good stewards of the money, force the council and the government to be accountable, but then not be bamboozled into their own inefficiencies by taking more money from the population while they're on their way to Virginia and Maryland. Anyway, my
Well, I don't want
substance.
to just have everybody just disagree with Erica, but one other point I would make is if we did nothing and we just basically left expenditures where they are, we would be still one of the most progressive states in the country. I mean, to get to David's point, we're not talking about being Texas. We're just talking about being sensible.
I just want to say that we have some of the deepest inequality issues in the country, and it's not about being better than Texas. We actually, if we want to deal with those things, we have to do better than what we're doing now.
Okay. So we will return to this point when we talk more about this, okay?
So we've got a couple much smaller bore proposals around commercial taxes, and then I suggest we take a short break after we do these. The first of these two is something that Jeff DeWitt mentioned when he was on the phone with us a number of months ago around changing the calendar for commercial property tax assessments. It's a fairly kind of technical thing, but I think it goes to an issue that I've heard from both on the assessor's side and on the property owner's side. Right now, we're mailing out commercial property tax assessments in February and trying to calculate the market value of property at that time before we're getting in hand the documentation of what their operating income was for the previous tax, for the tax year. And that was a pretty logical approach when a lot of this work was done by hand. A lot of this stuff can be done much faster now because it's done electronically, and there is a sense that Jeff's suggestion was that we could just wait on the assessments to May, so it comes after the assessors get the operating income statements in, and they would therefore be more accurate, you'd have less appeals, it would, particularly in a time when property values are fluctuating, it would just be one more point of information that the assessors would have in hand rather than forcing it to go through an appeals process.
Why wouldn't we do this?
Say again, Jay?
Why wouldn't we do this? What is the difference?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Rick? Easy.
Hey, Nick, I know Yeshim had some issues with this. Do you remember what they were? I can't.
Residential, commercial, or the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, one difference is you have different filing calendars for commercial versus residential. I don't remember, and I think we can stick a pin in that to consult with her as well. I'll make sure to circle back with her to answer Jody's question why we wouldn't do it. I can see what he actually thinks the answer might be.
Yeah.
It has to do with that.
We very early, I think David raised this one of our very early about property taxes, who pays them, and we have a large segment of people, universities that do not pay any tax on the property. Question being, given this environment, should that be raised? Not necessarily a tax, but some benefit back from exchange on these payment taxes.
We will get to that in a minute.
Okay.
We got that coming up. All right, last one, and then I suggest we take a break. There was a lot of discussion, particularly earlier this year, around the issue of commercial to residential conversions. One of the questions we set ourselves were, are there any tax-based barriers that are getting in the way of commercial to residential conversions? And Becky in particular did a lot of work trying to figure out ways that the tax code could be more neutral, to let both market forces and policy decisions drive these decisions about conversions or unwarranted barriers. This is a small one, but technically right now, as I understand it, a commercial building, if it's slated to be converted, is not assessed at the residential tax rate until it goes all the way through the conversion process, which can take years. And the proposal is to actually begin assessing at the residential rate immediately upon when it gets its permit to become a residential property. Now, we also understand, and Becky or Glenn can correct me if I'm wrong, that in fact this is the CFO is the assessor's office is doing this to a large degree in a relatively informal way, letting properties become assessed at the residential rate, and this would lock that in a little more formally. Now, if you get your permit, you pull your permit, and then you don't do the conversion, then it kicks back. Then there's a clawback, and then you have to go back and pay at the commercial rate under this proposal.
So is there a time limit?
We suggested 3 years, but that's obviously, I kind of pulled that out of the air. I think that was actually the DCBI proposal, right?
I feel compelled to add that whatever adjustments we're making is in compliance with law.
Yeah.
It is within
You're not
compliance.
making this up as you go along, are you?
No. And I don't mean to use it cheeky, but I just want to be precise.
Thank you. And obviously this is not relevant in Maryland and Virginia because they only have one rate. So.
Do we know anything about the, like how much time there is between permitting and maybe like an average amount of time between permitting and when a project is finished? I mean, these conversions aren't necessarily short.
So did some geologists.
Projects.
So honestly, Erica Wadlington, who's sitting behind me, she was the one who helped me sort of do back of the envelope calculations of what the average timeline would be.
And it varies in how complex the project could be, like how long you stay in the ground, and Jody could probably like comment on this a little bit more. And it can range from like a couple of years, like 24 months to 42, depending on like the project and how the scope
and complexity.
Yeah, and the market volatility right now is also going to slow down. So.
That's why you have clawback.
This is where I think, the CFO having the ability to assess the economic impact of regulations. If the project was scheduled to begin in 8 months, there's a carrying cost of capital for the investor, and there's a carrying cost of capital for the district, because you're not getting that revenue because everybody's just sitting around talking. And it's on everybody, the mayor, the council, everybody who's supposed to be making this work. You know what I'm saying? It's a big problem. Now that you're in private sector, I know you see it, I see it, it's unbelievable. We were allowing these things just to kind of go, you know. It's a problem.
Could I just raise just a related issue, just maybe for a future discussion? This is around our metro property. There's quite a bit of developable metro property for which we are not now receiving income or property tax. There are some exceptions. The Lord and Taylor, that aside. But there are literally thousands of potentially developable affordable housing opportunities across the city if we were to continue the non-taxing of metro property. It doesn't cost the Treasury a thing. We can use the Friendship Heights as an example, taking aside the Lord and Taylor and all of that, as we currently maybe receive property tax on that. But whether it be the Brooklyn community or Fort Totten or the stuff that's happening in Deanwood or Congress Heights, there are metro-owned parcels that we don't currently collect tax on. That if we were to give the executive the ability to easily extend the non-taxable status in exchange for affordability covenants, it doesn't cost us anything and we get something in return. I don't know why we wouldn't recommend that. Because it's particularly on top of metro stations. It seems to me would facilitate, workforce housing and facilitate people to get to work. And it doesn't cost anybody anything except the taxpayer, money that we currently don't have within our 5-year, 10-year, or 50-year plan.
So how about take a break and start up again at 7:45 sharp, 8-minute break?
Great.
What? What?
I don't know if it's her son or her daughter, I don't know.
What happened?
I don't know. I asked if everyone was okay and I haven't heard back. But that's why she's not here.
Because the same thing happened months ago, right?
Americans say, man.
Americans want to be rich.
They want
Yes.
to be rich. That's why this guy, this jokester Trump is so magnetic.
No, but we are having a HBCU World Series.
That's why Bill Clinton used to say, we want to live like the
June
Republic.
4th. Howard does not have the baseball team anymore. So we want to make this a good
What are we gonna make it myself?
All right, we are back. Thanks, everybody. We've got a few more focusing on property taxes generally, or specifically on commercial property. And then we've got a few focusing on residential property. And Richard, I believe, is going to start us off, building off the presentation that we had back in June, was it?
We're gonna go with that.
About split rate taxation.
And I hope you all remember that entire presentation dedicated to a complicated issue that I'm gonna try and sum up in about 2 minutes. But essentially, currently in the district, and pretty much everyone in the United States, when you pay a property tax, but we're on P6, apologies, P6, tax land buildings at different rates. Whether you're a resident or a business, you pay your property tax, you're paying for both the land that it occupies and the structure that it's on. That there feeds into your assessed value, you then pay the rates. What this proposal would do is create a tax specifically on the land. And there's two ways to go about doing this. One is to adjust the rates that currently exist so that there are two rates, one on the land, which is relatively high, and one on the structures, which is relatively low. Alternatively, you could just create a tax on land. And so in our proposal, we put forward a 31 cent per 100 of value tax on land. Now that's for both residential and commercial, but if you wanted to, you could segregate that and just put it on commercial. Why would you do this? Why are we talking about this? The idea is that the land is what is representative of the government's services. That by taxing the land, you're creating a stronger link between the service that are provided and the taxes that need to be paid. Because if you think about where land is valuable, it's where there's a lot of investment and an activity going on. And furthermore, what you don't want to see is a place where there's a lot of investment and activity and no structures. And so you would incentivize with this tax investment in property because the land tax wouldn't deter someone from building a lot on the land, because no matter how big the structure or value of the structure is, it wouldn't generally affect the tax that they are paying, and essentially would then reward the investment. It would also broaden the tax base, not in the way that we've talked about previously, where we would add people to the tax base, but again, it would reduce speculative property holding, and would find ways to hopefully incentivize people to build on valuable land in accordance with the tax plan. And then, as we've talked about a few other meetings, the person who put this forward, Nick Allen, specifically put one of his proposals as a way to support WMATA, because again, this tax on land value, where is land valuable? It's valuable near metro stations, and so you kind of create a loop where the people that are benefiting from the metro stations are therefore paying a larger contribution to WMATA. Why would you not do this? You would be significantly, especially if you adopted the split one, where there's one land and structure, there'd be winners and losers. And there's often winners and losers when you make tax changes. That's okay, you still make tax changes for other goals. But typically when we do an income tax, we can kind of break down, okay, these people will pay more in tax, these people will pay less in tax. We have an idea of who will pay more and who will pay less. That's on the 4th page of this proposal, where it says like residential impacts. And we do know that there would be savings in Southeast in the 16th Street corridor. We know there would be tax increases in density limited districts. But we can't exactly say who would pay more and who would pay less. We kind of have to go through the machinations of doing this to truly figure out who's seeing a larger burden and who's seeing a decreased burden. There's also just be new. We have an assessment system in place for good and ill. You would have to significantly change that to have new assessments made on property to assess how much that land is worth to therefore become a part of this tax. As for the revenue, again, in one of these versions, it's neutral because the idea is not to raise money, but it is to more effectively raise it from those that are capturing value from the city and therefore have valuable land. However, you could do this in a way, and Nick Allen has put forward a proposal to raise 300 million, and that is just the new tax on land. That I'll turn it over to you.
Just a quick question. What's the relationship between this system and the value of the property that isn't captured during the current system? And so I'll use myself as an example. I live by myself, a block from my office. And so, in terms of services I use, I have no kids, no public transportation. I can't think of a single service I use, to be honest, aside from the trash pickup. That's it. Will however this get constituted, will it equate to the value, my ability, and what I would get from that property? Do you see what I mean? Like, am I going to get? Let's assume my house is appraised for, the market tells you it's worth $100. Am I going to be assessed on that value of $100, the value of the property that I could sell it, or is it going to be unrelated to the value I could get if I sold it? Does that make sense? Am I not making any sense?
It makes sense, and to be circuitous, the tax is not representative of the values the services you consume as an individual, but it is accounting for the services that exist in the neighborhood that you live in. So when you sell your home, there's inherent value built into the home, not of the structure, but of where you are. Because, for example, just hypothetically, I don't want to use you, just anyone. If for example, a family has children, the children move out, they no longer use the schools. They don't use schools for 50 years, or and they're selling their home. The next family that moves in has kids, and so they pay more for that property because they're excited to go to those schools. And so there's value built into the land related to the services the government is providing in the activity that has been created around there. Or you could be someone who really likes, the wharf. And you love the wharf because it's this active, vibrant place and you love it. And then you get a little older and you're like, well, not for me anymore. But the person who comes into the wharf, they're all about that. They're all about the value that's being created. And so it's commensurate with the value that's being created in the land by the services in the overall neighborhood.
This feels like a very complicated change that, to me, we have a lot of other issues to deal with. And it feels like this is somewhat already incorporated in the values and the assessments that are in place. And we operate in places where you have a separate land and building. This is not atypical, but I think to do this right now just feels like, this could be a huge complication and a huge undertaking where I'm not sure how much we really get out of it. I'm not sure the benefits really are there.
I think Jody's comment about the hugeness, if that's a word, of this is right, but I think it's got some compelling features. And I've heard Councilmember Brianne Nadeau talk about this passionately, and she's made a case, I think, that this would spur people to be more density and add units. Now, the question I would have for that is, if you're in a neighborhoods where zoning is such that you can't exceed what you have now, how do you do that? So where would those places be where this would incentivize people to add? But it's a big thing to change. We don't quite know what the outcomes would be. So maybe we come to a place where we just, in our report, recognize the merits of this and just encourage the council and subsequent commissions to continue looking at it, that we all seem to be interested in it, but we just can't quite quantify the impact. But I like the philosophy that this is supposed to be revenue neutral. So it is not a cash cow. It's to incentivize certain behaviors and certain things. If we knew where those behaviors were really going to happen, if your map is correct, that's useful. But I'd like to keep it alive, even if we don't advocate for it in our document.
This is really good in a city where you have, a lot of demand, you have a lot of vacant lots, people just sitting on, you're trying to get the flywheel going, and on the margins, this could do it. But here, I don't know, it seems like zoning is a bigger impediment than the incentives or lack thereof of property tax to people building,
And historic preservation.
But something to research. I would agree with Gregory on subsequent installments.
The rationale is thought was how to separate why we would do it, why we would consider that. What's the, upside of it, if I may put it that way?
Of the proposal? Essentially, it would be reducing the cost of putting property to use. By emphasizing that the tax is based on the land, not on what you build, it would hopefully, it would encourage people of valuable land to build stuff on it. Because Mayor Williams was saying, like, the worst thing is we have a city and you have someone who has a really valuable plot of land and there's just nothing there. And under this system, there would be incentives to build that up. And I think even in DC, there would still be some use of hopefully finding the most efficient use of land throughout this city for what it could be put for.
Do you have a sense, Richard or Nick, of this map on residential impacts, and it looks like some of the biggest tax increases are happening like in upper Northeast, and I'm just curious, is that because that's, undeveloped land, or, I'm just curious about the distribution, because the narrative sort of speaks to this being something that would primarily benefit lower income areas of town.
Yeah, so Erica, if you look at the box that says tax changes by class, you'll see that like there's a really big spike in vacant, and I mean, I think this is where like I gotta admit that this isn't my map, this is Nick Allen's map. And so there's a chance that there could be just, very undense single family homes that are experiencing tax spikes, but there also could just be vacant property up there that is getting hit with a big tax increase. I think that's kind of like we would need to do more to specify exactly who would be seeing the increases as a result of this change and decreases.
Is that research we think we can do?
I mean, I bet Nick Allen has it. I mean, if he was able to put this together, I'm guessing he could break it down better for, I don't want to promise because, I'm not him, but I assume that he would have things that are underlying this summary presentation that we're now giving.
The other thing to remember is that these are based on the current breakdown of land versus buildings that is in the property tax database. And that breakdown was not intended for the purpose of differential taxation. And so, my limited understanding of this is that one could develop a system where the breakdown between land and buildings is more accurate, more defensible, but that at this point, and this is a point that Yeshim has made, it is basically, they've just applied a formula to break down the total assessment. So again, a lot more work would need to be done to Gregory's point. I think we could stick a pin in this and say this deserves more research, this deserves more consideration, because it could be a way to maximize the use of developable land and be more equitable across different neighborhoods. I mean, part of the point here is that the value of a piece of property reflects both the value of the thing that's on the property, where people have put buildings or put improvements on top of it, but it also reflects where the underlying value of the piece of land underneath it happens to be located in a desirable part of the city or on a desirable street corner, across the street from a park, whatever it is. And so there's a fairness argument for saying, well, we should be taxing the things that people have done on top of the property to a lower level than the underlying value of the property.
I have a question for clarity. Going back to the residential impact, page 4, is a statement more progressive if structured as a universal shelter exemption? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so what that is saying, and I skipped over a lot of language, essentially, I think if you were to design it where it raised revenue, one of the things you could do is then take that revenue and basically, like we have the homestead deduction, and just bring it up. So now, hypothetically, you enact this tax, you've kind of shaked up, who's taxing what. But if you're building up that floor, residents who have homes of lower values, 100,000, 200,000, well, they're either paying nothing or little because you're just raising that floor, so that maybe there would be a shift, but if you're using the revenue to provide that sort of like tax relief, somewhere like a standard deduction, the burden wouldn't fall on the lower income households even if possibly they're in a neighborhood where it could see some changes.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Next one is P7, negotiate pilots with large nonprofits, something we got a head start on last week. As everyone in this room is well aware, a lot of nonprofit organizations are exempt from property tax in the district. We got some data for you. Educational institutions are exempt from roughly 168 million.
168 million?
Yes, combined. Hospitals, 15 million. Theater and the arts, 5 million. Religious institutions, 17 million. You add it all up, it's real money. We have a lot of proposals both during this tax commission and during the previous tax commission trying to find ways to address this problem, to find a way to get those who do not contribute to the district but who use district services to give something. One of the ideas is what we call payment in lieu of taxes, or a pilot. And the way this works is that you would ask certain nonprofits, again, there would probably be some sort of floor that like the nonprofit would have to be above, so that we would exempt some of the smaller ones. And the district would then do some sort of, they would evaluate the property, and they would say, if you were not exempt, you would be paying X. And then they would do a calculation. I think we're using Boston, where they say, 25% of your hypothetical, or what you would have paid if you did pay, property tax bill. And then that starts the negotiation. Then the nonprofit and the district enter into it and basically go back and forth on, what should you be contributing, giving the services you consume, but the benefits that you disperse as a nonprofit. And so these would then become individual negotiations with these organizations to bring in revenue. If you jump ahead to page 3 of this, this is a little old, but it at least gives you kind of like a scale of this, where cities like Boston, New Haven, Providence, they have these programs. They generally bring in, it looks like Boston's the biggest. After that, it's roughly less than 10 million. We're not talking huge chunks of revenue, but this is a system where in other cities, they have been able to get revenue from nonprofit organizations. That's the big benefit. The downside is that the negotiations could be tenuous and ad hoc, and that these nonprofits often provide a lot of services already. So that'll turn it over.
Mine is around the big educational institutions that we have. We're big universities here, Georgetown, George Washington, Howard, etc. And maybe the question is not so much a tax or alternative tax, but what do they contribute to the district? For instance, in education, the most recent numbers show that unfortunately the kids who live in 7 and 8 of 67% of them don't compute or read at grade level. Would the city go to them and negotiate them? That in exchange for continuing tax abatement or tax exemption, what do you give back to the educational institutions of the city, grade schools, or junior highs, or whatever? The point being engage them in a discussion about what they do for the city. So the argument, I think, originally probably to tax exemption for educational institutions was that the students largely came from that jurisdiction. That's not the case anymore. They come from all over the world. So the issue is, we spend a lot of money on public education, but in my view, we're not getting as much back for that bang for that dollar as we should. So then we bring other players in and try to figure out how to get a better bang for that buck. And I'm suggesting that higher education is one such area to do so.
Jim, I agree. I think, rather than it be called a payment, a payment in lieu of taxes, they could be programs in lieu of taxes. You could use the same acronym but have a different impact. And it's not uncommon, for a certificate of need for a hospital, they have to have community benefits in order to get a certificate of need. It wouldn't be unprecedented here in the city. And, along the lines of the educational programs, again, for the city to negotiate, I like the idea of tethering, what are billions of dollars of economic activity to our CBEs. In other words, there would be expectations that not hard goals, but a reporting that Georgetown purchased so much from CBEs, preferably off of our list. Similarly, there would be goals for employment, because we know that those individuals will pay taxes to the city. See what I mean? Non-punitive ways. I don't want to be punitive in this exercise, but give people the opportunity to bring them into the community through employment, educational opportunities, and whatever. I don't see any downside to that.
It would require discussion, an agreement by the council for the mayor to engage in those kind of discussion with them. But I've been in this town a long time, and every time a education report comes out, it's the same. It hadn't changed. The racial disparity is there, one, and two, just the disparity across the wards of the city. And it doesn't appear to be related to money. I mean, if I may say that, it's related to putting the energy in with some new kind of thinking. You know, your definition doing the same thing over and over again, you know what that is. You don't get much out of that. But to try to break this log jam, I mean, we don't need to get into discussion here, but if we don't do it, we continue to see the outcomes that we have now in terms of activities that the city, that are detrimental to the city, criminal activities, and unproductive citizens who don't have the skills to compete in this market.
But I hate to build in politics just so blatantly into this, but like, this is something that, it'll never get done. This will consume the city for 2 decades. Every nonprofit will have 17 lobbyists in the Wilson Building campaigning against it. You know, there are nonprofits and there are nonprofits. Some nonprofits, like Rashawn's have, do one thing. Other nonprofits do great things, and they have many executives with 7-figure incomes. And they're doing pretty well, and they will tell you all that they're doing, and they will quantify it. What they're not doing is necessarily what the city needs. They're doing what they want to do for their own charter, which is, sure, it's meritorious, but he said to the city, would you prefer to have that or that value in dollars? We'd probably take the dollars. But this will never go anywhere. This is going to be the biggest fight in ever, and for $27 million, Boston, with all of its institutions, got $27 million for all that. We would end up with $2 million and a lot of enemies.
Previous, you remove that, though, on the program side. I mean, I think we agree, not a payment in lieu of taxes, but the programs, at least breaching the subject of having institutions above a certain threshold, $100 million, simply do a voluntary report or an involuntary report on what their employees are, district residency, and what their CV revenues are. And again, we'd have to not approach this from a punitive, we're going to get you, but it's collecting information and actually sometimes inviting these institutions to connect. I don't know if necessarily the head of American University, I'm not going to pick on Sylvia Burwell, but I don't know if she's ever sat down with Christy Whitfield and knows what our CBE program might be and I think there is a willingness to, frankly, to engage and figure it out, but we'll know.
Well, a great example of, this is outside of education, but it's to the point though, not on money, but on this universities helping the city. A spectacular example, but there are 2 examples. One, both in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon and Pitt have really stepped up and have really been instrumental in Pittsburgh becoming, to the extent it is, a tech hub. And that's Carnegie Mellon and Pitt. And Penn has really stepped up, first under Judy Roden when Eddie Rendell was mayor, and now has really stepped up, rebuilding the whole area around 30th Street Station. So the precedent for getting the universities to up the ante on these different categorical levels they've got a lot of precedent actually around the country.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, to David's point, which is, I think is a practical one that we actually experience, is the very microcosmal level, is we started out running the ARC with all the nonprofits that are there with an agreement that they would serve Ward 8 and Ward 7 residents. With fervor, they said yes. over the last 18 years, we've seen, I mean, yes, there is the headwinds of migration patterns and people, gentrification that lead people to Ward 9, Prince George's County. I totally get that. But today, so each year, as a part of the agreement to be on our campus, we get kind of a roster and a update of where people are coming from and who we're serving. And we've seen a gradual shift in who's being served on campus. And so unless, and we've agreed that there needs to be more fervor recruiting from what we said in the very beginning was our mission. So to have a level of accountability, and now there's data and there's a level of conscientiousness about recruiting from the communities that they agreed to serve. So I think if there's not something there, then behaviors over time changes and you're not able to, your initial mission somewhat becomes diluted. So having requirements like that, I think, I'm not against that at all. I mean, those are smart. Yeah.
Well, right, it's essentially, it goes back to what I started earlier. You know, we have a city where 45% of the population is African American, but only 13.5% of the businesses are. If you're creating billions of dollars of potential demand in these connections, there's a one-on-one where everyone wins. That doesn't really take anything out of the treasury and builds a stronger community in the process.
But the difference, just to harp on this again about the fairness thing, is the non-residents. In Massachusetts, every staff member at Wellesley and every single physician and nurse at Mass General pays taxes in Massachusetts. Mm. Here, a majority of the people those places pay taxes not to us.
Right.
So that compounds the problem that we have here. So it gets to the whole notion of capturing out-of-state income as well.
Yeah. I really agree with that, and I think that's why, I don't have a disagreement with the pilot in theory or even, and I think none of it precludes the kind of conversation with our institutions that David and Rasan are talking about. But I prefer the per employee fee that lets us get at folks who aren't paying taxes in the district. I mean, when we had a conversation as a group with the universities, we heard, very explicitly what share of their employees actually live outside of the district. And it was a large share for each of the institutions that was present. So, I mean, I just think that this doesn't begin to get at sort of the loss in revenue, the loss in sort of collective effort here in the district for where we are creating the jobs that folks outside of the district get to have.
That's right, that didn't even get out of the terminal, right?
We recommended it, the council did not adopt it.
But even if they live outside the district and don't pay tax, this is a way for them to contribute to the district by providing the service here. I mean, I'm not suggesting what it is, to oral service or whatever, to the kids who are having difficulty in education. I've seen the amount of money that we spend on education go up greatly, exponentially.
Who would negotiate these from the city's side? The CFO or the executive?
We got a good negotiator.
I think we can study what other jurisdictions have done. Hopkins Local is a great example of Baltimore, and it's one that's proximate. And so both in community development and also incentivizing employment at the university and also the entrepreneurship opportunities, we just take a trip north.
Yeah.
And we study this and we get it right. I'm hesitant to have a kind of a knee-jerk, immediate, change of course, but we bring them along and let them know that we don't mean them harm, but we're looking to find ways for everyone to win without punishing them. And slowly changing behavior. Getting to the universities, there are a number of lower skill jobs that would be well suited for a number of our residents, just as there are middle management and entrepreneur opportunities. If we start tracking it, we can start scoring it against each other and have internal competitions to see who cares the most about the city. It's
Okay,
just
keep
that.
on rolling.
Okay. To wrap up the discussion of commercial property taxes, we've got a couple of much smaller bore provisions. So this one, we're talking about P8, applying the vacant property tax to vacant storefront commercial property. This came up in one of our stakeholder discussions where there was concern raised about vacant properties, vacant storefronts in particular, in the wake of the pandemic. All the changes in the retail sector. The district has a vacant property tax, but it does not apply to a building where what's vacant is the storefront. So you could have a building that's otherwise occupied, but the storefront is vacant, and meanwhile you've got small retailers who might want to operate a pop-up shop who are looking for space. And the idea is that by levying a tax on if a property owner leaves a property vacant for an extended period of time, then they're going to have to pay the tax at, of course, at the 5% rate. The arguments for doing this: supporting local businesses, trying to spark street level life in a number of neighborhoods. The arguments against: it could be an actual additional burden on commercial property tax owners who are having trouble letting out that space, and it could be complex to administer.
Whatever Jody says, I'm going to agree with.
I'm all for relief. I'm just not sure that this is going to incentivize what we hope to incentivize, is what I would say.
Could we consider the opposite approach? In other words, because this would essentially multiply by 2.5 the taxes that an empty storefront is paying. And, you know, at this point, with people at home, with this remote work where we are, we don't necessarily have the foot traffic to incite some of these large retailers to come. I'll take you back to what I said earlier when we first joined, which is to look at what, you know, right after reunification in Germany of the two Berlins, what they were confronted with loads and loads of storefront because you no longer had two ideologies competing. The mayor created tax incentives and breaks for the visual and performing arts to take over space. And it actually wound up creating, you know, the largest arts community and industry in Europe. And so maybe we think of a different approach where we say, look, for, you know, we could go back for disadvantaged, underserved businesses, whatever. If you take off this list, if we're trying to create wealth and expand that number, you know, there could be credits, offsets, any number of incentives for you to go find that person and bring them into your place, as opposed to hoping that I walk down the street and says, that looks great, give it to me. I just, again, in this, it's all about messages that we're sending. I'd like to send the message that globally that we are going to tackle income inequality through wealth creation, focused on communities that typically haven't had it, while goring no one else's ox. It worked there, to this day.
You got any examples of where this has worked? The question that was raised.
San Francisco is doing it. They are generating some revenue out of it. Mike, you looked into this.
But I mean.
But are they incentivizing behavior?
Yeah, but are they getting more retail?
More of like a negotiating tactic, is my understanding.
What?
Negotiate. It's not really creating revenue. It's more like a way to negotiate and get to a fill.
No, but is it? But do you have any examples where it's actually resulted in livening up streets because you developers went and animated the space by lower rates for retail or whatever happened? Any, no?
I mean, the place we know about is San Francisco. I think, you know, San Francisco has a lot of other issues right now.
Right, that's not a great example.
Do you guys remember the example that it was District Bridges that she mentioned? It was the old Staples in Columbia Heights.
Yeah.
Right.
Which was a huge space that was empty for years, and it was right there, right, you know, on the street. She thought it really harmed the neighborhood.
Yeah, in the DC USA complex, and there were all these small micro businesses, because she's really dealing with small businesses that had no place to set up, but they could have been in that space. They could have generated more activity, drawn more people in, and done better as businesses, but they weren't given the opportunity.
Why not, I'm sorry, why not take the opposite approach? And that is, for these empty storefronts, just as they did in Berlin, you simply, rather than charge them the current or whatever, you charge them a reduced property tax to incentivize the building owner to go find you to come in. And the way they did it there was the tenants were responsible for operating and maintenance. They didn't actually pay rent. They were simply responsible for operating and maintenance because the space was empty. So you had the business activity, the opportunity there. The deal was, rent is free. They pay out O&M on their own, utilities, whatever. And then in exchange, the building owner doesn't have to pay the property tax on that amount. So it's a chance for everyone to win until the economy starts to change, until these businesses get on their feet and are able to go get legitimate long-term leases in their own right.
I would just change this rationale for property owners who fail to find. It seems as almost intentional. I think we're unable to find.
Yeah, I hear you. I think there's a point of view to incentivize them to find.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. The next one is P9.
Where are we leaving this?
So I think.
I'm sorry.
Jody, that's part of the mystery here. It's left unsaid, and then it's going to come out of the wash.
Watch the dead wake.
Yeah. Where?
I think David's put forward a compelling alternative that people seem to be nodding their heads to.
Do you want to remind Jody how the process works? Because she missed that first thing where you explained.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So what we're doing is we're taking notes on sort of where the general sense is. We're not like voting at this point. And then it's on us to sort of put together a package that tries to capture the sense of where the group is.
I'm not sure, even with David, I'm 100% for this, so we'll look at it, okay.
Yeah, I think more input would be really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would generally, like, this doesn't have to be in the conversation.
Okay.
That's at my email address, call me. P9, so there was a number of, we wanted to be respectful of the fact that we got a fair amount of input from various stakeholders saying the assessment practice, the assessment process, or the deed recognition process is just not working for one reason or another. It feels unfair. And honestly, these got pretty technical pretty quickly and exceeded our capacity to really dig into them. So our simple suggestion here is for a number of these issues to put them into a bucket and suggest that OTR together with housing and commercial property and builders and the Economic Development Office and the mayor work together to sort some of these out.
I'm for it if David agrees to serve.
I will. If we can expand it to include, returning Eleanor's very successful program of tax deductions, refundable tax credits for certain individuals to buy homes. We're talking about wealth creation and first-time home buyers, given the tethered to inflationary increases, for refundable tax credits for down payment purposes and for an elimination of deed and recordation taxes for first-time home buyers. Whatever we have to do to get people into home ownership and into an opportunity to generate, intergenerational wealth.
That's good.
It's an investment in our city, in stable communities, the whole thing.
Why was that eliminated, just curious?
Money.
It's just added.
Why is everything? It was $2,000, I think, at the time, and boy, things are much more expensive now. And if we were to create something, talk about an incentive to bring families back, if you could get a $10,000.
But the homebuyer tax credit was federal.
That was federal at $5,000.
But in any event, we could do it locally.
I'm not saying it didn't have merit, I'm just saying that's who's paying for it.
It would have to, it would take.
Definitely.
Okay, but you can work on that on the next P3.
Yeah, but it would take Glenn's work, because it may be that the community we're trying to reach won't have $10,000 in local.
Don't get me started, I agree.
But you could carry it forward, you
Next
could make it refundable, you can do all kinds of other things to give people cash immediately to start buying homes, start stabilizing communities.
So we're gonna pivot now to more issues around residential property taxes. Dan?
I was just complaining, go ahead.
P10, tax multifamily buildings at or closer to commercial property tax rates. This came out of the proposal from, I forgot the guy's name. That included a reform package. It also included higher sales tax and lower income tax rates.
Doherty.
Yeah, Paul Doherty. So once upon a time, this is how DC actually did tax multifamily buildings at a rate higher than other residential properties. Right now, multifamily buildings are taxed at that same 85 cents per $100 of value rate. Commercial properties obviously taxed much higher. The idea here would be to take multifamily buildings, which currently are defined as 6 or more units, tax them closer to commercial property tax rates or all the way up to the commercial property tax rate, rather than the current residential tax rate. Obviously, Maryland and Virginia, this doesn't apply because they tax all property the same. The arguments for doing this, part of it, I think Paul put it forward as a way of raising revenue to pay for tax cuts elsewhere. But another argument is that it treats, if you invest in a residential property, if you invest in commercial property, it treats those investment properties more closely to the same and starts to narrow the gap that we have between residential and commercial properties. I think there's a significant possibility that this would pass through to renters, and so we would increase rents to some degree. And arguably, our current differential serves as an incentive for conversions from commercial to residential. You get a big tax break if you're switching over to a residential property.
I think it was $1.26, if my memory serves me. It's been a while. The residential rate for rental was $1.26, and we made it on par with residential homeownership. The thinking at the time was, and I'd have to defer to those who are doing this analysis, that these increased taxes were being passed on to tenants, thereby making the cost of rentals more expensive. And we wanted to create parity, and that's why it was reduced. I don't know if we've ever done any research to verify that, but that was the thinking, intuitive to me.
Makes housing less, that says everything to me, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Given where the housing crisis is in our city right now, I don't know what to do this.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Erica, were you trying to jump in?
I was just gonna say, I mean, I feel the same. I think it might have an impact on affordability. I definitely think the costs get passed through to renters. That doesn't mean our property tax rate can't go up or shouldn't go up based on value of the property, but I think putting it on par with commercial, I'm not sure that makes sense.
Sure, you want to do this one?
Yeah, next is P11. Again, reminder, we are pulling ideas from wide buckets of ideas.
Can we do 11 and 12 together? We kind of just discuss them together.
You can.
Yeah, and then so I'll pivot. So I'll go quick. Currently, real property, so per homeowners, is 85 cents per $100 of assessed value. That is low. We have all the charts that show DC as the outlier here. I can't flip it, but it would be the reverse. DC's residential property tax rate is far lower than in any of the neighboring jurisdictions. A lot of people don't like to hear that. That's just because people do pay. Excuse me?
But isn't that a lot of times tied to your income rate?
So, okay, so the rate on the assessed value of your home, the 85 cents, that rate is low. And there also are additional things in the tax code to further lower it. So if we looked at what we call effective tax rate, so how much you pay versus what you own, it's even lower because of things like the homestead deduction, which lowers the assessed value. The circuit breaker program, which delivers benefits to low-income houses. The senior program, where we cut it in half if you're eligible. The cap that stops it from growing at above 10%. All that stuff pushes it down even further. So DC has the lowest rate, And in fact, if you even go all the way to what people actually pay, it's even lower relative. But again, relative is the key term here, because if you have valuable property, you might not care about that rate, because what you're actually paying to the city is still relatively high. But this proposal would be to raise that rate and bring it kind of more in line with our neighboring jurisdictions in Maryland and Virginia, and also more in line with our commercial property tax, because we are not doing this one. You would not just do this for fun. You would be doing this to raise revenue from a lot of the valuable residential property in the district, and then using that money to find other offsets and other more possibly targeted tax reductions, whether that's for commercial property, whether that's for homeowners other way, or various other ways. But this is the one tax where DC is lower than all of its competitors. So
but let me ask, I suspect there's in part a reason for that. Other jurisdictions pay for schools, etc., out of their real estate homeowner taxes. Sales taxes are largely collected by the state and rebated to the local jurisdiction. So it's arguable to pay for the local schools, they raise the taxes, or the taxes are relatively high. District of Columbia, we collect all the sales taxes and they go into a fungible budget. So I don't know the argument for raising the real estate taxes.
Well, I think you're making a couple of really good points. One is that the district has full control. I mean, they don't have full control because it's Congress, and we're not going to go there right now, but they get to use income taxes, sales taxes, commercial taxes, whereas if you're a local jurisdiction in these other states, you tax property to pay for the schools and that's it. The state is taking care of income and they're taking care of Medicaid. So that's one reason why it might be lower in the district. Another reason, just broadly speaking, again, let's just go back to pre-pandemic for 1 minute. Like there was a system where in the district, we kept it low on the residents, on the people who were living here and paying income taxes, but putting it high on commercial. That was vibrant because it was a way to get money from all those people who work here and don't do it. The reason you would raise it is just, if you think about all the stuff that we're talking about, and all the tax breaks we want to provide, money's got to come from somewhere, and so we just thought that it would be honest and transparent to put this on the table as an option. This is just one where you could go.
Have we ever talked about lowering expenses as a way to offset taxes or no?
You mean like what the government spends?
Yeah, like $19 billion, yeah.
I think.
Well, in fairness, and you're a trustee, so I have to be careful, but in fairness, I brought up an expenditure commission, everybody said it's not our job.
I didn't say that. I thought we have to look at.
I mean, if you look at our charter, it's not. If you look at the law, it's explicitly
But
not.
programmatically, it is
I don't think we have the expertise or the bandwidth to engage the education and the health
But
and
anyway,
the civil service community.
So,
I clearly think regulation and expenditures, I mean, it's like, well.
In fact, I think one of our mandates is to ensure that the government has enough money to run the program it has.
I don't think so.
No.
That's not in the legislation.
I think it is, it's somewhere in there.
I don't believe so, Gregory.
so I would say, but to come back, Gregory, not to be argumentative, my comeback would be, has enough money. What do you mean by has enough money? What is has enough money? What you say is enough, or an analysis says you need?
I would say the former. I mean, unless we want to start second guessing the council on education policy and health policy and safety net policy and public safety. I mean, that's where we want to go. We can extend the commission's life by 10 years and have 15 more members. But I think, look, I don't want to raise taxes on anybody, but I think you're right in terms of a place where we can create some relief to give to other areas, competitiveness included. This is kind of it, because especially if you have a multi-million-dollar home, you've chosen to stay here, you're probably a lot more bothered by the income tax. Your property is your gold nest, it's getting better and better and better every year. You've chosen to stay. If you move to Florida to shelter your income tax, your house is still staying here. And the city is still a valuable place to live. People choose to live here because it's convenient, it's fun, it's central, et cetera. So I think P12 for me is very interesting. I don't know what the right number is of maybe of a donut or something, or have the homestead deduction phase out after a certain thing as well. Or you could do something like increase the homestead deduction and the rate, or do something like that. But this is clearly, I think, where there is some reason, some places to give, to raise more money to provide to relief to what our priorities are.
And P12,
what is the homestead deduction?
about 76,000 right now. All right. So the first 78,000, if you
My
own your own.
calculator is pretty low, the benefit you get from that, one. And two, the senior deduction.
The what, sorry?
The senior is relatively low.
So if I might, Jim, our revenue, the legislation talks about meeting projected revenue needs, which is pretty loosey-goosey. That doesn't mean whatever they want. Okay?
All right,
But that's going on that question, but back on your point, talking about offsets, that's what we were talking about right now. You were talking about, at Gregory's point, offsets. Are you finished with that?
No, I'm also, but I'm just questioning the rationale behind raising the real estate.
Can we let Erica get in next?
Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of other reasons for thinking about making our property tax more progressive, beyond raising revenue, including like expanding Schedule H, which I know we're going to talk about, to try and keep longstanding DC residents, homeowners in their homes when they're seeing property taxes go up and they can't afford that. Also to push back against decades upon decades of racist policies and practices that confined where Black people could live and other non-Black people of color could live in the district. Created entire communities for white folks. I'm talking about racially restrictive housing, deeds and other kinds of policies and practices that have created differences in where we all live, racial segregation in terms of where we live, that also have implications for what kind of wealth building, like home ownership, wealth building, intergenerational transfer of wealth. And so, you could raise money from a progressive property tax and put more dollars that we know we need into things like our HPAP, our homeowners home purchase assistance program, to make sure that, which is primarily used by Black and female and women residents of the district, to make sure that we can build Black wealth and build wealth for folks who've been left out of this big source of prosperity here in the district. So I just wanted to point out that there are other potential reasons beyond just raising revenue for the budget generally.
But what if it doesn't raise revenue? What if the experience from Los Angeles, which I gave you all when I circulated it a few weeks ago, shows a 35% reduction in the sales of these homes? What happens when, as happened in California, a total flight of higher income people who saw this as the camel's nose under the tent? And
Because
so
it's being done with as much relief, David, as well.
But may I finish? Yeah. So rather than be speculative, I at least tried to go and find evidence of what happened to the real estate market in Los Angeles when they did this, and it was a terrible thing.
Didn't they start off at a much higher level though?
But that's where it always goes, Gregory. So just bear with me. Again, the messages we're sending. We may tell.
What did they do in Los Angeles?
They had an increase deed and recordation, and then they had a higher tax on properties above $5 million. All right. But just bear with me. We may think, oh gosh, we're going to do this and stop, but that's never the way it works. It starts here today and it's there tomorrow, because there's always going to be a parade of people who have an excuse to say, give us more. While the message you're sending is, you're on borrowed time. You're next. And even if that doesn't happen, that's the message we're sending. And that is a terrible message for whatever money we get. Look, this city harvests more money every year than it can spend.
Gotcha.
Okay, the
Okay,
last thing I want to say is an expression I was raised growing up is you never learn anything from the second kick of a mule. Okay? That's a deep expression, take it home and think about it. But the last time some person who wanted to raise revenue said, this is it, we're not doing it again, and you fall for it, but when they do it again, you haven't learned your lesson. Because you never learn anything from it.
Well, a couple of things. One is we have to, I think we all have our views on, we're hearing from one another, but we have to have, if we're gonna come out of this with some kind of accord, and maybe that's not, maybe we won't get there, and I have my views, I have my fears. But we've gotta have some kind of accord, we have to give some value to one another's opinion, you know what I mean?
Of course.
Okay, we can't just bring all of our intellectual artillery and just nuke the other person's opinion, or we're not gonna get very far. Just,
what I'm suggesting is that we have some balance. And that for every person who says we have to raise revenue, that if that is the point of view, offer a counter view.
The point is that we're gonna come up with a net neutral. For every dollar we raise, we're gonna reduce.
and a point I would like to make, in my opinion, given the, okay, so the reasons why you would want to raise the property rate, now I'm not talking about the progressivity of the rate, but the reasons why you would want to raise the property rate are, one, it actually would help from a lot of people's point of view, including mine, it would help our politics. Because right now, a lot of people in the district who pay this relatively low rate are insulated from the real effects of not stupid, but what I would say are bad economic policies. So when you're not getting a lot of feedback from the public, when the council raises taxes, because I'm paying a relatively low property tax, I'm not feeling I'm not really feeling the pain. This, everybody's paying more. Theoretically, more people have skin in the game, you're gonna get better political signals from the community. And the other point I would make is, where I would take any, if you were to raise the property, you would say, the property rate right now is relatively low because it's basically subsidized by commercial real property, which has been historically undergirded by the federal presence. The federal presence ain't what it used to be. Commercial property is down in the dumps. You no longer have this subsidy, so we need some help, at least on a temporary basis until we get the downtown going again. Everybody's got to help incentivize downtown recovery and use the money from residential real property to incentivize downtown recovery, and however we decide to do it. To me, that would be a very intelligent offset.
I could do that.
I can agree with that. I would just add too that in terms of arguments for change, I think trying to align ourselves with Maryland or Virginia in the wrong direction is not a compelling argument. It's great that we're actually lower than they are. I don't think we should raise it just to be as bad as they are, but it's just not, especially since the income tax is so much higher.
Right, and that.
So I don't think the first bullet is really a rationale for change at all.
Well, I'm just saying, use it to reduce the other taxes.
Right, exactly.
But typically, property tax and income tax, like we pay a much higher income tax here. And usually there's an offset with property tax. Just like in states where there's no income taxes, they're relatively high property taxes. So it doesn't make sense to me that we're gonna try to lift both of these. And these are the people that I thought we learned earlier are the taxpayers who are, this is like killing the golden goose. This makes
No, but
sense.
we're talking about using the money to reduce commercial or income, or whatever.
But these are the people, I thought these high income earners in the city were who paid a huge percentage of the taxes.
He's
in
talking
the
about a
city.
general tax increase, Jody, unless I mistook.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right. I'm with you, but if you're paying higher than I could pay otherwise income taxes here. I benefit maybe from a little bit slightly lower house, but my housing is more expensive here than if I lived in Virginia or Maryland or Florida or South Carolina. I mean, it's much more expensive for me to live in this city. So now I'm gonna pay a higher income and I'm gonna pay more on my taxes, and you want me to do that because I wanna help downtown, which I hear you saying, but really, people make decisions around their kitchen table. I don't think they're gonna buy into that, and I think this is, I wanna be fair to everybody, but I just think it's a tipping point. This is a very expensive place to have a house, period.
And I largely agree, and let me just add to that, Ken, I don't think it's a responsibility of district homeowners to subsidize downtown new development or redevelopment downtown. I don't see that as their responsibility.
Whose responsibility is it if it ain't the citizens?
But no, yeah, I understand that, Tony. But my argument fundamentally is the district has enough money. It's not being spent judiciously.
You're not gonna get a disagreement there.
I'm sorry, Frank, but I looked at this like the auto industry a few years ago, President on the picket line, the auto industry had flatlined. We've had an international pandemic and regional competition is really putting the pressure on what has been a great industry. Downtown automobile, same thing. I'm not opposed to helping, them get back on their feet if ultimately they're going to be a golden goose for us. So short term, not perpetual subsidy, but something to help even the playing field. What the mayor said that I feel to me was broadening the base so that when we have that, so everyone has skin in the game for the services we are getting, so that we're paying the freight. And the people who have more expensive houses will obviously pay more. The people who have less expensive houses will pay less. But everyone is paying and sharing the pain equally in this process. I fear that
I hear you, but respectfully, I have a different view, but disagree with that. Some of the people who pay a lot of taxes that relate to either income or residential taxes receive very few benefits. They don't send their kids to the school or feel uncomfortable sending their kids to the school. And the flow back to them for paying the taxes is maybe it's not there.
Philosophically, what I'm putting against is us segregating certain pieces and portions of the population, and the notion being, a tax on the very wealthy homes, while it may feel good, if all of the weight of running this city falls on 20,000 households, if those folks leave, we're dead. All right? I like the idea of broadening so that what the mayor was saying, you broaden the payments so that people feel it and know it and start to pay attention. I think a lot of the population is checked out because we fed them a steady diet that other people will pay for it or we can borrow the money.
Just to be clear, everybody pays property taxes. Property taxes get passed through to renters. That is true. Nobody would rent to folks and pay the property taxes separately and not pass it through to the rent. So everybody is paying into a system. I'm going to disagree about this language around people who don't have skin in the game aren't paying. Everybody's paying taxes in the district.
My point was, the mayor's suggestion, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would look at a change in the real property tax to increase it even modestly across the board so everyone would feel it, so they would have skin in the game if the council decides to do it or not to do it or go back and raise them again. In other words, a broad-based feeling of governance as opposed to putting the weight on a particular population because it feels good or we think it's the way it should be.
What is
that was
Wait,
just
wait,
an
wait, wait.
That was just
The
an
notion that
observation.
if you pay more, you're gonna pay more attention. And I don't necessarily buy that.
Yeah, I guess there's a disagreement. That was just an observation. My real point was, and I guess there's disagreement to that, was if we want to provide incentives to do what various folks want to do, a lot of us is incentivize economic development, we have to pay for it. We can either pay for it by finding cuts in the budget, which is not our province, or we can find offsets. That's all I'm saying.
For example, what is the policy rationale of the homestead exemption for a $5 million home?
Well, back in the day, it was we need high
It's small.
earners.
Well, but with the homestead deduction hasn't increased with the price of homes, correct?
Okay.
So it's, you know, when no homes were over $1 million, that was a big deal. So now you've got homes, I don't know how many homes over $1 million. The homestead deduction is a net savings of what?
We'd have to look, but it's not, it isn't.
It's about $78,000.
Right, but net to your tax bill, about $700, $600?
Yeah.
Right, so out of your $21,000 tax bill, I don't think this is the straw that broke the camel's back. The rationale for having a homestead deduction when it was done was not this. And if it were, it would have gone up with inflation pegged to the value of homes, and it'd be $1 million. So I think we're just correcting an anomaly and raising some revenue to do other things that we all think are important.
Well, then eliminate the homestead deduction
Okay.
on certain properties. But what I very much oppose is creating a two-tier system where we're going to start isolating and expecting one part of the population to foot a bill. I do resent that. I don't think that's bringing a community together where we all have skin in the game, and we're all rowing in the same direction.
Could we have some estimates of what homestead deduction elimination or phase out would be?
And Greg, one last point on the issue of revenue neutrality. I don't think we are obligated to necessarily have revenue neutral. I think this commission has an opportunity to fulfill the mandate, which is to make us competitive, address racial equity, and all of those things, that is not tethered to the final number. If we aren't able to offer the truth to the council and real suggestions that are going to accomplish these things, and it may result in less revenue, may result in something else. They could stand behind us and say, well, gosh, I wouldn't want to do that, but the commission said so. It's the same notion behind, base closure commissions and so on. We give them cover to do what they ask us to do that they don't want to do themselves.
A good expenditure commission would function like a BRAC, yeah.
Well, and that's been proposed and passed by the council.
I mean, well, it's really not,
An expenditure?
Yeah. It was not, the mayor didn't staff it, I believe.
the mayor just didn't get going on it.
Why should you pay more taxes if your house is more
Pre-pandemic, yeah.
It died with the pandemic.
Because you're not getting more services for it. My argument is make a nexus between what you pay and what services you receive. If there's no nexus, I don't get the argument for raising the taxes anyway.
So we're at just about at time. There were 3 proposals that were really about property tax relief for homeowners in one way, shape, or form that probably fit better with some of the proposals that we have coming up anyway. So I'm going to suggest that we
from last time we punted as well.
defer that. There's a few others that we've been punting along the way, so we know we're not always, but we deliberately built in more in hopes that we would get to more than we actually get to do. With that, I think we're done. Again, next Tuesday, discussion of economic development competitiveness, then back to proposal review on October 10th. Thanks, everybody.
Almost white people. You gotta get about 80